So I'd love to welcome Janko Jovanovic. He's a design manager and cross-disciplinary designer who explores the edges of design. He focuses on managing teams with a passion for individual professional development. While a generalist, he specializes in navigating uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, which he translates into his management practices. I love the conversations I've had over the years with Janko, and so I'm super excited for him to be here today. So let's just, without further ado, turn it over to him.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you for a great introduction. Uh, I guess I guess everybody can see this now. Right. So yeah, thanks again, and thanks for this opportunity to have a chat about design career. I think it's a good timing now. It's the end of the year, and a lot of us are kind of trying to reflect on the past period and maybe do some planning for the future. And I think embedding resilience into that might not hurt, especially because the last year was crazy, right? So I think this meme is kind of overused on the internet, but for a particular reason, I think it reflects quite well what's going on, not just this year, but over the last several years. Basically, we're in the middle of kind of multiple crises that are kind of happening maybe at the same time, like converging at the same time, from climate crisis to economic crisis, wars, pandemic, and all of these kind of, you don't know where one begins and the next one starts, where one ends and the next one starts, and it's kind of affecting the companies, right? So companies exist in this kind of context. So we've seen some of them disappearing, many of them restructuring. We've seen massive layoffs this year in particular. And of course, we ask ourselves the question, how do we navigate this complexity? And I don't think there's a definite answer, but I hope that we can at least talk a little bit about some tools today. And it's important because we are now not in predictable waters, right? This is a very unpredictable terrain. It's a new terrain for us. And basically, the maps that we used to orient ourselves previously are just not helpful anymore. We can see that. And when I say maps, I think like the normal linear thinking. Normally, when linearity is connected to stability, right? So whenever there is a high degree of predictability and kind of no major surprises, you can think about, going from A to B more or less undisturbed. However, we've seen this over the past few years that it's not possible, and that some of our, speaking of professional development, some of our trajectories might actually take the shape of this bold purple line. And the reason for that is that this A to B linear thinking is very rigid, right? So you don't allow, a few people mentioned their flexibility, adaptability. And I think this is spot on. This is what this is about. That this kind of rigid planning and thinking, it just waiting for the moment to kind of break entirely. And this is why we need to kind of shift a little bit our mindset and the way we're doing things into this kind of linear thinking. And of course, we've seen like linear thinking would be something that happened before pandemic. I get up in the morning, I take my bus, go to work, but all of a sudden, like over the night, kind of work came into my bedroom. All of a sudden, I'm like, what's going on? How do I navigate it? And a lot of people actually struggled. It was maybe fun for some at the beginning, but over time, it was really difficult to navigate that. And I think this purple line kind of shows just kind of simple representation of what with nonlinear thinking is about: anticipating the future and adapting to it. I think those are two key words. And both of those words actually lead to resilience. And these are some great answers in the chat. It's basically resilience is just kind of way to bounce back from adversity, right? And speaking of career development, and this is by no means any kind of definition, it's just for us to kind of have a sense where we are going, is the capacity to adjust your career into a preferable direction in any kind of circumstances or in the face of adversity. But yeah, let's get practical. So I'm going to share a few tools that I kind of cherry pick, and a couple of things are worth mentioning. I'm just going to sell these tools now a little bit. So these are tools that are normally used by organizations, companies, governments, even military to do some kind of planning and forecasting the future. So these are kind of serious tools that are used in serious contexts. Of course, there are many of them and many frameworks and even fields that are kind of using the tools. But these tools today are just simplified versions for a professional development. And I use these tools with a friend of mine, Ben. So we both use these tools over the last several years in many different contexts for defining a vision for an organization or strategic conversations and defining a strategy, to personal development and professional development that are a little bit different. So, and we have really, really good results. So I think how to start the mess. I think these tools are not the framework. So we're going to talk about them, but it's not that you need to follow them all, right? It's just you can, whatever are you doing with your professional development. I'm sure some of you probably already have something out there that you're working on. But if you don't, like, a good idea is to start with your values. If you do nothing else, just start with your values. And this is just one of the ways to do that. There are many ways to externalize your values. And I'm sometimes I'm even surprised, when I start with professional development with people, how oftentimes this is not externalized. We all have values, but sometimes we are not kind of deliberate about them. And here, this is the most simplest way. There's a kind of spectrum from personal or professional, and it's a great opportunity to just be intentional what you value in your personal life, in your professional life, or it could be something that you value in both. So, I might prefer a clean and quiet home, but I might really like a mess at work, with a lot of sticky notes and a lot of stuff. So I think it's a very well an example. Or I might be very opinionated about climate. And I would say, oh, I don't want to work for anybody who is not into sustainability. So that will guide my choices for my professional career, right? So I think it's very important to be intentional about it. And of course, you can do introspection in many kind of different ways. I'm sure a lot of you do that. So there's just one way if you don't have anything else. All right, so on to the tools. The first tool is about exploring not one kind of direction. There is no one career, but multiple possible paths. And this is coming from fields that deal with complex systems and complexity. And this is about kind of a variation and redundancy. These are the concepts that are quite prominent there. And it's basically talking about variation is to have multiple ways of doing the same thing. And redundancy is about having a backup option. Basically, if you take this common saying, like, don't put your eggs in one basket, or whatever the exact phrase is, I think it's that basically, but just in a more structured way. So here in a yellow, we have basically how it works. You define a few paths that you want to go and kind of round that with a common theme. So the common theme would be kind of your North Star. There are a few examples here, like becoming a leader or emergence. That's my kind of personal North Star, or social transformation, or whatever there is, for you. And then you define in this purple row here that gives you an ability to plan a few ways to get there. So let's say if becoming a leader is a North Star or a common theme, then a management path would be an interesting choice, coaching as well, or maybe leadership on projects, or maybe mentoring others, or thought leadership. There are many ways to become a leader, and you can keep this common theme as vague or specific as you want. Some people do have a more or less clear idea what this common theme is. So it's a good idea then to start from that and define your paths. Some others are not sure what the common theme is, but they know a few different things that they would like to do or explore. And then it's a good idea to start from defining different paths and then figuring out what the common theme is, what is the relation goes. Once you define that, I think there are a couple of other roles here to fill. It's more like just to put in some assumptions, how do I want to measure my success? When I want to achieve this, what kind of support do I need? Once you have this done, you have your like a first pass on your career. You'll have a common theme and maybe 3 or maybe more paths or goals to get you there. But now this is where things get really interesting. And this is one of the tools that people in futures thinking, strategic foresight, and strategy can use and abuse a lot in a good way, obviously. And this is where we are trying to, with this tool, to kind of challenge our assumptions, because what we put there are really assumptions. And here we want to use these 3 different, let's call them sceneries for the future, that will set us up to explore different possible scenarios. And for each scenarios, we try to answer with a simple question, like, if something happens, what would I do in that kind of situation? So let's go over these 3 scenarios. The first one is about expansion. So this is where like a hypothetical but very plausible set of circumstances where everything grows, everything that's happening today keep growing at an accelerating rate. So both good and bad. So we've seen, for example, if your responsibilities are growing, they will grow even further. If layoffs are growing in a kind of negative trend, they will grow further. So You just keep expanding on what's happening today. That's one. The second one is about transformation. So this is normally a setting in which something happens that will kind of dramatically change the way you do things. In professional context, that could be that you don't need to worry about your income anymore, or that artificial intelligence can make troubles, but also opportunities for you, or that product design is not interesting anymore, but something like design for social innovation. And the last one is collapse scenario. And I think, we already see that, not some scenario, but setting. This setting is already here, like pandemic, climate change, economic crisis, recession. I think these are all settings in which you can explore, if this happened, what would I do in this kind of scenario? And let me give you an example how this works. So let's say that one of your paths is a management path. Well, if management paths means that my responsibilities will grow, and this is the first setting, that means that I may work more hours or more intensive hours. And do I really need that? And do I want that? I might have a family or some other things that I do. Do I really want to, work more than 40 hours per week and have an additional stress? And, what would you do in that kind of scenario? Same goes for transformation. Let's say that your organization, for example, you want to become a manager, but your organization wants to adopt a little bit different kind of structure, like this holacracy or whatever it's called, where there are basically no need for this kind of management. So what would you do in this kind of scenario? And collapse, I think the obvious one could be, a layoff. What happens there? If you want to become a manager and meanwhile you get laid off, do you look for a management role in your new job? Do you do something else? It's a kind of question that you need to answer. And this is no one-on-one. So for each of these settings, you can have multiple questions, and for each question, multiple answers. Here's an example here, another example for transformation. It's about universal income. And that's not something, that's not science fiction, right? It might happen at some point in the future. And as we have seen, these kind of new realities can happen overnight. So just because it's not there yet, it doesn't mean that it will not come. So if that happens, what would you do? Would you still work for someone, or would you start your own coaching career maybe? Or would you, I don't know, do some kind of social design, do something for homeless people, or would you write a book? I think these are all interesting kind of answers to this question. And the whole purpose of this exercise, like I said, to challenge your assumptions and to bring insights from this kind of last row into your first tool, these multiple paths. And the reason for that is normally when we do these multiple paths, we go for obvious. And it's just our nature. We go for linear thinking. And this is where things get really messy, where by kind of thoroughly exploring these kind of different scenarios, we get to learn a lot of interesting, unexpected, non-obvious things that might happen in the future. And even if they don't happen, they might be useful for us today. We might learn about something new that we might start doing today. And if they happen, the great thing is that we will be prepared to answer and kind of bounce back more quickly or more easily from adversity. Okay, you can now go back and forth between this A and B kind of a tools, but it's really kind of generated. You'll get a lot of different insights depending on scenarios that you use. So it's a good idea once you kind of diverge to converge a little bit and filter out some things. And one of the things that I really like is this Stoic approach, and it's very, very simple. It's kind of a stupidly simple thing. It's just to define the things that you can and that you can't control. And it's coming from Stoicism way back, for 2000 years ago. They kind of pondered on this question. And I think it's quite relevant today. And it's simple, right? Take a promotion as an example. We don't have a control over that, right? So it's useless for us to bother about that and be upset if we don't get promoted. But having said that, a lot of things in life are not, black and white. Normally, we do have control over certain aspect of something. And this is called like a partial control. So what's a good idea to do is to take every kind of idea that we want to explore and really defragment that into smaller and smaller pieces until we are sure that which pieces we have control over and what we completely don't have control over. Speaking of promotion, of course, it depends on on your boss and your, I don't know, promotion committee and whatnot, budgets, many different things that we actually don't have any control over. But we do have a control of our own kind of career, our own skill set, making good relationship with your leads, with your stakeholders, finding a sponsor for your promotion, maybe doing some undercover work, showing results. So I think there are many things that you can do and that you have control over that will increase the chances to get promoted if that's the goal. And what I like about this approach is that you can use it. This is in no way linear process, so you can use this any time during the exercise. Right. Once you narrow down everything, you can start planning. But in this case, we're not going to do a typical planning, like planning from this moment into the future. We're going to plan from some point in the future to the present day. And there are a lot of benefits from doing it this way. First, normally these kind of goals that are a year from now or 2 years from now it's a lot of time. We've seen what happened just this year. So it's a lot of time and you cannot count on kind of precision there. So it's a good idea to start with kind of vague future and be more specific as you move towards the present day. So let's say that you want to become a leader or a manager in a year. You can take any time horizon, but let's say it's a year. If that's the goal in a year, you ask a question like, what I need to do, what needs to be in place 6 months from now so that I can be a manager in a year from now. And let's say you can, lead one person, or you can coach a couple of people, or you can, I don't know, move teams where there is an opportunity. So there are many things that you can do to enable yourself to be able to take a team 5, let's say, in a year. But then you go further or back into the present day and you say, well, if I'm to lead one person in 6 months, what do I need to do today or in 3 months to be able to do that? Well, if I don't have any experience, a good idea would be to maybe read a book or take a course or maybe shadow another manager or talk to my boss if they can help me with this. So by going back to the present day, you are chunking things into more specific and more smaller achievable goals. So that when you then go like in a linear fashion from present day into the future, all the goals are quite small, quite tangible and achievable. Yeah, you can use any time horizon and you can use any time column. You can say, present day, 3 months, 6 months, year, 2 years, or it can be a year, 9 months, 6 months, 3 months, whatever works for you. I think this is just an example. It's quite a flexible tool. And you do this for each of your paths, each of your 3 paths. You do this kind of planning. So what you might end up with in the end, something like this. You have a common theme and you have your 3 paths in purple. And for every path, you have a time horizons and activities that you need to do in order to get there. So let's give you an example. And this is this is a real world example. So for one person, a purpose driven work is a common theme. It might not mean a lot to us, but it mean a lot to them because it's very specific. Actually, it's about purpose with people and purpose with kind of the work they do, which is around strategy and sustainability. And these are some activities here that they might want to do if they want to achieve that. So let's say strategy, for example, if they want to lead strategic projects in a year, well, probably in 6 months, they would need to gain some experience to lead a smaller project or participate in some kind of a bigger project as a contributor. And if they don't have any kind of experience with strategy, they might want to take the Founding Institute course on UX strategy and start from there. So, there are kind of very tangible steps in how to get there. And with each steps, you're getting closer to your goal. But what's interesting here is that these kind of what you should look for is to get a synergetic effect between these different paths. So each one of these paths relates to another. Like coaching is definitely something that can help you both as a strategist, as a sustainability expert. And strategy and sustainability go in hand in hand. A lot of sustainability work is strategic and vice versa, right? So I think all of these paths kind of support each other in a way. If you kind of learn about coaching, that will enable you to achieve the other goals as well. So that's another interesting thing to look at when you're planning these paths, how they can support each other. And also the good thing is if some of these fail, for example, sustainability design expert is not possible for whatever reason, there are just not, that many jobs. this person still has a lot to look towards and to explore in coaching and strategy, and can also figure out to kind of switch the last path into something else that might be relevant at that point. And this is basically how all these tools work together. A few final remarks before we go into questions. This is, like I mentioned, this is a non-linear tool. So you can use all of these tools, or you might use just a few. Even if you just shake your assumptions with this what if tool, it's already going to help you with resilience. Or if you use just this planning backwards, it already helps you to to make your plan a little bit more achievable than, just thinking about going into the future, into the unknown. The second point is that each one of us own our own development. So I think it's great to have a support from your lead and from your boss, but we own that. So I think you can talk to your manager and kind of suggest to use the tool if you like it, of course. But if you do that, do some prep work, like fill this out and then ask for help, ask them to, support you. And in the first tool, you have in these three paths, you have a column that says like, what support do I need? So it's a good idea to put some questions for them. How do I achieve this? Is there space for me here to do this and so on? So be proactive. And for managers, I think, we are also employees, and we also need to take care of our careers. So I'm using this tool for myself, and can you do kind of a co-coaching with other managers as well. And it's definitely useful to use for us. And there are managers there, I think, can support your reports to use any kind of tools. It doesn't need to be this kind of tool, but I think if they are, deliberate about this, I think that's a great effort and should be recognized. Yeah. And with that, I would like to thank you. I guess we can go for questions now.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing this with us. It's really interesting to kind of see. I know some of these kind of tools and practices like backcasting and thinking in these uncertain ways. And so it's great to kind of see how that can be applied directly to kind of our own career paths in ways that we can start doing it ourselves even before working with our managers. So I'd love to just start taking all the questions that we have from the group. So the top question at the moment is, what practices, books, or people to follow do you suggest for design leaders seeking experience with kind of the social, political, strategic design challenges? So that's the first part of the question. And the second part is thinking, how can we use our SaaS world as a lever in this process? So maybe take the first one. Are there kind of like some books or people that you suggest for design leaders who are kind of thinking about the strategic design challenges?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there are a few books that are really light in terms of like strategic design direction. I think Jeff shared one of those, and it's one of my favorite books. Of all times. It's by Dan Hill. I think it's called Dark Matter and Trojan Horses. And it's a really good book on strategic design. And if you take just one, I think that would be. And I think there are a few others. So I don't know on top of my mind. Like I know that there is a purple cover, but I just don't remember the name. I think it's just called strategic design. And people who to follow. Yeah, Dan Hill. Dan Hill would be one, of course, to follow.
Yeah, you had some great references in your slides as well about where the kind of themes were, like people who were inspiration for the different tools that you were using as well, which I thought was quite wonderful. And I thought what was like just about the second half of that question as well, who's the person was asking about like something about a SaaS company being a lever. And I know levers can be really key moments in kind of systems thinking and strategy. How do you think about levers in your career path maybe, and how to utilize like your past experience as a lever moving forward?
So if I understand correctly, is how you use your past experience basically to kind of do kind of self enablement, let's say, in the future in your career development, right?
Yeah, they were specifically asking about SaaS companies. I'm not sure if you have anything specific about SaaS, but if not, then in general, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if I mean, there might be some specific things for SaaS companies, but I think these things apply in general to different kind of contexts. And I think that's what makes them really efficient, is that regardless of the context, whether it's government or your futures or your professional development, they just work. You might need to tweak a little bit. Um, So I don't know. I think just maybe I would go back to tools. I think just as you use different kind of tools, you start to recognize, certain things and just become more alert to what's going on around you. I think that's maybe one of the key points is just to be a good observer. And it's, I guess, no different than kind of being a good designer, just kind of observing what's going on and trying to kind of use some of these tools or maybe even intuitively to anticipate, what's happening and how would I navigate this. And a second thing would be really to externalize all of that. I know that we all have our own internal monologues with us all the time about, what's happening, who am I, what's going to happen. But I think being intentional about this and externalizing, writing down, using any kind of tool, it doesn't matter, journaling, the tools that I presented this evening, it doesn't matter. It's really make this whole thing more tangible, would actually help you do something about anything that you're thinking of. So I think maybe those two things come to mind as a kind of more, maybe my answer was a little bit vague and general, but I think it just applies to any kind of context.
Yeah, wonderful. I'm thinking about the tools again. We have someone here who's asking, like, from your experience, I know that you've used these tools in your own managerial work and with working with your teams in the past. What was the most challenging of these tools to put into practice? And they ask also, could you maybe share a story around that as well if you have one?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I think the most challenging, I think there are a few challenging things, and these tools are not for everyone. Like some people really resist it, and I think that's fine. There are other ways to do it. But maybe the most challenging one or is this what if tool and a few others that I didn't present today, but these kind of tools that are more kind of explorative and can really push you into maybe uncomfortable spaces. So I think it's great to be there and to kind of get some learnings and insights from these uncomfortable spaces into today. But I had experience where some people kind of were really triggered by that. So it kind of pushed them into space that they don't want to be. And that was like a really not a great thing. It didn't do it didn't help them to move forward, but it actually pushed them away from this kind of thinking. So I think this is one of the examples, like with this kind of tool, you can go in different places and you can explore different scenarios. We, like Ben and I, had a really good experience with personal futures as well, where people kind of did a lot of different kind of moves in their life, like moving countries, opening businesses, and so on. It's not that they didn't think about it, but I think these tools kind of make it more live. You can be intentional also about that. Like what kind of scenarios do you want to explore and what kind of scenarios are maybe not great for you. And especially these collapse scenarios can really be weird and, trigger maybe something. So I think just be intentional and focus on your maybe more immediate environment if things get uncomfortable.
Mhm. Are there areas you don't want to go into, or how do you kind of address that to begin with? Are you using your own judgment with like the work that you know about that person? And yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's a combination of things. One is really to have a good relationship with a person. If we are talking about kind of professional development in an
Mhm.
organization, it know them and then have an open conversation. Like if I as a manager I need to support them on their journey, we need to be transparent and we need to kind of share our fears as well and our hopes and so on. So I think that's the way to do it. And then there are other tools that we use that I use for this is like values. I'm talking about values. There are some kind of journaling or writing a letter from the future. I can imagine yourself for 5 years from now writing a letter to yourself today. What does that look like? Or it could be other tools, but there are many other tools to see kind of where are the boundaries for each individual and then, be within those boundaries or at least know which kind of boundaries can be crossed a little bit and push people to good direction in uncomfortable space.
Yeah, I think that was really I love how you started out for like what are your values at the beginning of this, and it reminds me of a coaching path that we use with our alumni sometimes is like going through their past educational history and work history to kind of hear what kind of values we could pull out from an outside perspective of hearing them talk. And then also letting them kind of say, like, does that resonate with you? I guess you were talking about emergence, and they say, I really like this idea of growth path of emergence. They're having some ideas around what that would mean, but they want to hear what Janko defines as an emergent growth path. How would you define that?
Yeah, I think it goes back to this adaptability and flexibility that we talk about and resilience in general. I think this is how the world works, right? And we just see it now because the crises are so tangible. But to me, emergency is really being very, very adaptive and kind of just taking in what comes your way and, trying to figure out what you're gonna do with this, whether you need to react on that. It's gonna change your life in a way, how to go around it. So a lot of things, I think we, especially in the West, right, we think that we are a lot in control, but actually we are not. I think it's maybe an idea that is doing us a little bit of harm. So this is where this emergence comes from, like letting go of the idea that we are in full control of our lives and our careers, and being more, not a passive role, but observing, what's going on, and really use some kind of reasoning, some kind of structure to deal with all these emerging things around us. Next year, I mean, we just don't know how it's going to look like in many different ways. So how do you plan around that? I think, step by step, and just adjust along the way.
Yeah, this reminds me also of when you were talking about the identifying what you can control and what you can't control. Sometimes just creating that list of can control and can't control eases that comfortability and that anxiety a little bit more, of understanding things that you can move forward with and other things that you can't focus on them because you have no control of them. And so that was another part of the one of the tools that really kind of sparked an aha for me. Thank you so much for chatting with us today, giving us some wonderful, really practical tools I think that we can use. If there's ways that people want to get in touch with you to ask you some more detailed questions or continue these conversations, how can they get in touch with you?
I think the best way is through LinkedIn. I'm kind of sort of active there. So I think it's the best way to just find me there. And yeah, let's connect there and continue the conversation.